Well, it's that time. Should we go ahead and get started? I'm impressed we have as many people as we do, all things considered, uh, this past week. Okay, today is February 21st, 2021. This is the Faith and Function class. You are being recorded. So, hi, everybody. You're being recorded. So, go ahead, Judy.
Hey, well, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's well and has come through this weather ordeal intact and with your pipes intact. Before we open with prayer, are there any joys or concerns that you'd like to share? And then let's bow our heads. Holy God of love, we thank you this morning for this day with all its blessings and opportunities, and especially for this opportunity to gather together to study and to learn from your word. We remember before you today those of us who require healing and comfort, and for their loved ones. Terry Bishop, who continues his battle with cancer, and for his wife Carol, who are members of our class, and for all victims of COVID-19. We also celebrate this morning and thank you for the return of sunshine and for the thaw that will bring renewal to our world. Lord, through your Holy Spirit, open our ears, minds, and hearts to the teaching of your word this day. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, this morning we're going to continue with the third session with Dr. Patrick Gray, who is professor of religious studies at Rhodes College. I wanted to put in a little extra plug for Patrick too. He is going to be publishing a new book in April, and that is the Cambridge Companion to the New Testament, which is going to be published by Cambridge University Press. So we can all be on the lookout for that. Patrick's going to continue with his third session on Alexander the Great and the Bible. So Patrick.
Thanks, Judy. It's good to see you guys again. So this is the third of our three sessions. The first time I talked about military, political affairs, and forces unleashed by Alexander in the 4th century BC. And then last week, we talked about some cultural and religious kinds of effects of Alexander's conquests, especially the way it affected Judaism. We sometimes call this a Hellenistic Judaism because it's Greek-speaking Judaism. It's Judaism found around the Hellenistic world, the world that is the result of this fusion between kind of Greek and Macedonian and non-Greek cultures and religions and customs, all kind of fusing, mixing together. And today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Hellenistic Judaism, but we'll talk about Alexander's indirect. I mean, Alexander didn't really mean to do much of what we've been talking about, but you know, the law of unintended consequences, there are a lot of good and bad consequences that come about from a force of nature like Alexander. And we'll see some of the effects in Judaism, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and then we'll look at also some kind of religious and philosophical kind of consequences. And so we'll look at some Greek philosophies that are indirectly, in ways you may not anticipate, affected by the kind of social situation, kind of circumstances that he brought about, and then how that in turn helps us understand some things about the New Testament. Because all of this is the world in which Jews were living and breathing, eating, sleeping, were the first Christians. And so these are the kinds of cultural influences that would come to bear for the people who are writing the New Testament and reading the New Testament. Now, I just had something come up on my screen that said your internet connection is unstable. So if I stop moving or talking, somebody let me know. But can you hear me okay right now? Okay, well, that's good. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here in a few minutes. Before I do that, I want to talk about 2 or 3 different things. One, I want to talk about Alexander and the city he founded, Alexandria. He founded lots of different cities called Alexandria, about 70 different cities, not all of them named Alexandria, but more than one of them named Alexandria. The one in Louisiana, not, I mean, I guess he didn't found that one, but in northern Africa, Alexandria is still a quite large, quite active city. It was one of the largest cities in the ancient Mediterranean. He didn't stay there very long, but he built it. And it was in many ways the equal of, if not superior to, Athens as kind of a cultural capital in the ancient Mediterranean. One of the largest, maybe the largest population of Jewish citizens in the Mediterranean were to be found in Alexandria. A couple 100,000 Jews, it is said. Maybe more in Babylon. I don't know if you consider that part of the, it's not really the Mediterranean, it's so much further to the east. But Babylon would have been probably a larger city with a larger Jewish population. So Alexandria is the home to, kind of a real vibrant Jewish culture. Now, later on, you're also going to have a very vibrant Christian culture in Alexandria. And it's very Hellenized. I think I've mentioned Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jewish writer who lived in the 1st century, very prolific writer. He's kind of a philosopher. He's a big fan of Plato, but he's also a faithful Jew, but it's a very kind of Greek-influenced Judaism. And he writes about Jewish history, but especially about kind of theological topics. And you can see the way he tries to make sense of the Bible. He would not have been unique, but the way he tries to make sense of the Bible, you see him, kind of combining his Greek side and his Jewish side. We see him reading the Bible in the way many ancient Greeks would have read Homer, for example. When you read Homer, when you read the Iliad, you read the Odyssey, the gods don't behave very well. So many ancient Greeks said, well, that's not what the gods are really like. We need to read these stories allegorically so that they represent some other story other than the literal story you read in the pages of Homer. In the same way, Philo and other Jews would read the Old Testament and say, well, that's kind of a weird story there. Maybe the story about, Abraham being called to leave his homeland and then sacrifice his son. That's not a literal story, or we shouldn't understand it literally. The real significance is some other kind of allegorical kind of interpretation that he would offer. So that is something that we see going on at Alexandria, and it's partly the result of these kind of Greek cultural influences coming together and intertwining with Jewish cultural influences. Again, later on, it's going to be a big Christian city as well, and some of the most important early Christian writers will call Alexandria home. For example, Clement of Alexandria, and then Origen. Origen is perhaps one of the greatest scholars right up there alongside Jerome, one of the greatest Christian scholars of the ancient world. He understood Greek, he could read Hebrew, and again, a very prolific scholar. So Alexandria is one of the great legacies that have of Alexander the Great that have something to do with the Bible. When you hear about Alexandria, are there other things do you associate anything at all? Do you know anything at all about the city of Alexandria? I don't know if anybody, I've never been there. Has anybody ever been to Alexandria?
I have, and the thing I associate with it is the library.
Yeah.
It was such a wonder of the world, the Alexandria Library.
That's right. Yeah.
And they
Didn't it
rebuilt that.
They rebuilt it. Is that what you said?
Yes, they built a new one on the same site, supposedly, as the ancient library. And it's magnificent.
Somebody else was saying something. I didn't catch who.
I just mentioned it had been sacked, but Judy.
Yeah, it's unclear what happened to it. Either it got sacked or, more often you hear that it burned down. I read something the other day said probably just kind of, it may have like fallen into just disrepair. And then when it actually burned or got sacked, there wasn't much there. It's hard to know for sure what happened. But yeah, it was this magnificent library, but then it was gone. But now it's back. So Judy is able to report good news. Rick?
Yeah. Does anyone have an idea as to what was lost as far as literature and scientific writings, etc.?
A lot would have been lost, but no, we don't know for sure. We don't have the card catalog. I mean, we do have so many different authors like Aristotle. We have a ton of Aristotle's writings, but we have lists of about twice as many things than what we actually have. So probably half of Aristotle's writings were lost. Yeah, we often come across references in ancient writings to this or that. And when we don't have them, it doesn't mean necessarily that it got burnt in the Library of Alexandria, but that's what they said about themselves. Is we've got every book worth having. And so if it got lost, that may be one reason.
Didn't it have something to do with the Arian Athanasian argument? Would it have happened in the early?
It's sometimes it may have been around that time, and so Athanasius of Alexandria and Arius, so that debate was really raging in Alexandria. I don't know that it had anything to do with the burning of the library, but you see, that's another thing, right, that you bring up where a lot was going on here. Yeah, a lot of Christian theology kind of got hashed out here. Yeah. So the other thing a lot of people know about is the lighthouse at Alexandria. I don't know if it was officially one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, but the library perhaps as impressive. And I want to talk about the library just briefly because the library is the setting for a story passed down about the Bible. That's an interesting story. It's according to an ancient Jewish story. The librarian at Alexandria said, we've got every book you'd ever want to, check out here, except for one. We do not have Torah. We don't have the Hebrew Bible in Greek. And that would really make our collection complete. So according to this story, they send to Palestine and ask for a team of translators to come to do the work. The king, is going to sponsor this. And so a bunch of translators, 70 come. Sometimes it's 70, sometimes it's 72. The details sometimes change. But they come and say, okay, we're going to translate at least the books of Moses, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, right? We're going to do that. And then you'll have that in your library. Well, according to this story, it's told in there are different versions of the story, but according to this story, they go to their own room and kind of do their own kind of private, individual work before they then come together as a big committee to compare notes as they've all translated Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. What do you think? I mean, if I gave you guys all, I don't know if you all, I don't know, Spanish, German, whatever, here, translate, this prayer into Spanish. All do it separately, and we compare notes. What would you probably find? Do you think it would all be the same? Think it'd be different? Think there'd be some differences? There'd be some differences, right? I mean, even if we all kind of got it right, it's not going to be exactly the same. Well, what they find, according to the story, the 70 come back together, they compare notes. Lo and behold, what do they find when they compare notes from their individual translations of the first 5 books of the Bible? What do you think they find?
They're all the same, aren't they? Supposedly.
They're all the same. Not what you would expect. You would expect exactly. Mary Edith, I saw your mouth moving, but you're on mute. Were you saying they would be all very different or all the same?
All the same.
Yeah, and that so you would expect a bunch of differences, but they're all the same. It's a miracle, right? The only way that would happen would be by some kind of miracle. So did this happen? I mean, who knows whether this happened? It seems unlikely, right? But why would you tell a story? Do you have any ideas, any speculation of why you would tell a story like that if maybe it didn't happen?
To make it
It adds to the prestige of the what's being.
Yeah, so kind of it would add to the prestige. Yeah, yeah, Judy, or yourself again. But right, yeah. So Judy, you're
Oh, I was just going to say it would make it more authoritative.
right. I mean, there might be a little bit of uncertainty. I think I read that little snippet from the book of Sirach or Ben Sira, where it said, things change not a little when you translate them from one language to another, and that includes, the Word of God. And so yeah, probably the function of this story is to add prestige, authority, build confidence in this version of the Bible, which comes to be called the Septuagint. Septuagint, which is a Latin word meaning 70. It's, the scholarly abbreviation is LXX, which is Roman numerals for 70, related to the team of 70 or 72 translators that, according to this legend, produced it. But yeah, so you might imagine that Jews who are reading the Bible, their Bible, not in the original language, might feel a little insecure, uncertain, lacking in confidence. Is this really the Word of God? Whether people in Palestine, Hebrew speakers, were kind of giving them this kind of inferiority complex, I don't know. It may, in the story about the librarian saying, hey, we need the book, that may be true, may not be true, we're not sure. It could have been that for liturgical reasons, we need the scripture in our own language. We've got all these Jews living in Alexandria, they're celebrating the Sabbath, they're doing Jewish observances, but if they don't have kind of an official version or a complete version in their own language, you can worship when you don't understand something, I suppose. But a lot of people like to know what's going on. And so that may have actually been the demand, I guess, there.
Patrick.
Yeah.
Patrick, I once heard a Jewish scholar say it would have been a greater miracle if 70 Jewish scholars were all in the same place and agreed on the appropriate translations.
But
that might have been a bigger miracle.
Or that they all agreed was a big enough. You get 70 experts in one place, you're going to have at least 80 or 90 different opinions about things, right?
Yeah.
So was that the remark, was that in a discussion about the Septuagint?
Yes, it was just a joke, for humor about Jews. I guess Jewish people, the stereotype is they like to argue.
That's right.
Two Jews get in an argument, you get three opinions.
That's right.
These are all jokes I've heard Jewish friends tell.
And you always need to preface it when you're telling a joke about a group that you're not a part of. Right? Hey, this is one of my best friends is Baptist. I got this Baptist joke.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and not all Jewish people felt this way. There's actually one rabbinic, and the rabbinic writings are all in Hebrew. One rabbinic writing that says, actually the day that the Septuagint was translated, all these evils were unleashed on the world. So not everybody agreed. That's another example of that, right?
Oh, it's okay though. We never argue about translating the Bible here in the Christian Protestant world. We all agree on everything.
That's right.
I see.
So we are.
Hey, verily.
And just because, probably there was not one translation. Actually, we know there was not just one Greek translation. There were multiple people at multiple times, even though it was probably, the major work was going on in Alexandria. It was not all centralized. People didn't stop copying manuscripts in Hebrew. And so it's, the story, even if there's some truth to it, oversimplifies. It didn't kind of like all stop right there. Another interesting thing about the Septuagint, this Greek version of the Old Testament, is we start seeing different versions of books in the Bible. We don't even have to get into the story of kind of apocryphal writings, which Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Christians believe to be part of the Bible. Protestants, Jews do not. But but there are also versions of books that Protestants also regard as part of the Bible that in the Greek version look different. So, for example, the book of Daniel, when you look at the Greek version of it, and we're not sure how this all happened, but there are actually extra stories in there about Daniel being sort of this amazing sort of, I mean, he's kind of like a detective who solves some mysteries where this woman named Susanna is falsely accused of adultery, and he kind of, catches the old men who are the real villains. And there's some other stories. They're also in the books of Esther and Jeremiah and Psalms. The Greek version is a different version, or at least there's like bonus material, so to speak. This Bible, this version of the Old Testament, becomes the Christian Bible for the most part. Remember, the early, New Testament's written in Greek. Even though Jesus probably wasn't speaking Greek as his first language, it's really, I always, whenever I stop to think about it, it's really amazing that nothing except a few words in the New Testament, nothing from a Christian is written in Hebrew or Aramaic in the first century. I mean, nothing. It's all written in Greek, at least what survives. So that's testimony to the importance of Greek here. And also, it makes us remember that this version of the Bible was, for many, if not most of the earliest Christians, the version of the Bible. And there are a number of texts in the New Testament that seem to reflect knowledge of the Septuagint. In the book, or some of these other legends, in the book of Jude, there's they quote some writing called First Enoch. They talk about some story about an argument between Michael, the archangel, and Satan. They have an argument about the body of Moses who's passed away. It's not in the Bible. It's in some of these kind of alternate versions, though. So, there are a number of things. When in 2 Timothy 3, when it says all scripture is inspired by God and is useful for instruction and that sort of thing, is Paul talking about kind of the Greek version? Is he talking about the Hebrew version? Does that distinction not really kind of occur to him? So there are a number of things that are really interesting to stop and think about the significance of the Septuagint here. The one book that's published, I think 2013, it's called When God Spoke Greek, the Septuagint and the Making of the Christian Bible. It's pretty accessible, but it talks about all the different sorts of stories about the formation of the Septuagint and how it helps us understand certain things about the New Testament. So I recommend that if you're interested in reading more. Some of the stories, for example, in Hebrews chapter 11 about the faithful by faith, Abraham did this by faith, Moses did that. Some of the stories in there are not, they don't specify stories from apocryphal works that would have been found in the Septuagint. But they seem like pretty strong allusions. There are no clear quotations in the New Testament of any of these kind of books that are only in the Septuagint versions. But looking at, kind of fast forwarding to the 4th century briefly, Jerome, the church father Jerome, who translated the Vulgate, the Latin version, he was commissioned by the Pope in the year 382 to translate the Bible from the original languages, from the Hebrew and the Old Testament, Greek and New Testament, to translate it into Latin, the vulgar tongue. And he said, okay, I'll do it. But then he said, well, okay, which version of the Old Testament should I translate? Should I include these books or portions of books that are only in the Greek and not in the Hebrew? And he kind of thought there were differences of opinion among Christians. Jerome thought, well, maybe let's not leave these out. Or, he didn't want to leave them in. He didn't think they should be in, but he's like, they're in such wide use. Maybe we should put them in. So he translates them, but puts prefaces and says, there's some dispute about these. Let's clear it up. But over the next 1,000 or so years, as his version of the Bible becomes the official version of the Bible in Western Europe, those little prefaces and reminders to clear up these disagreements, they kind of drop out. And so those things are firmly part of the Bible until there's dispute about it in the during the Reformation. All right, I'm gonna switch my screen over, but as I'm doing that and sharing with you, let me know if there are any questions or comments you have.
Well, Patrick, sometimes in our New Testament, especially Paul's letters, he does quote passages from the Hebrew, from the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament.
Right. Yeah, and so
did he use the Septuagint, or did he translate it himself?
So sometimes he's pretty clearly quoting from the Septuagint. Sometimes it's not any known version of it. So the just shall live by faith. The righteous shall live by faith. That's something that he quotes a time or two in the letter to the Romans. And it's also quoted in Hebrews. And sometimes it's clear it's coming from the Septuagint, but sometimes it's not clearly from the Hebrew. And we don't know if he's just kind of like translating it on the fly from memory because he's bilingual, or if it's some version of the Septuagint that we haven't seen, or some version of the Hebrew we haven't seen. But yeah, you're exactly right. His default, and usually he's using the Septuagint. That's right.
The same with the Gospel of Matthew, quotes a lot of what we call the Old Testament.
So yes, one noteworthy example is in Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 through 25, where Matthew is telling the story of the virgin birth, and he quotes Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14. It says, "A virgin shall conceive and will have a child and name him Emmanuel." And so, the Hebrew word there, for example, is alma, which means kind of a young woman, many of whom are virgins, but maybe many are not. In Greek, it's parthenos, which is more clearly virgin in the kind of literal, technical sense. It's not that the Hebrew rules that out, but there and other places you see New Testament writers quoting the Greek translation, and the Greek translation itself is trying to make sense of sometimes unclear or ambiguous texts that are unclear or ambiguous in the Hebrew. But yeah, that's an example. I don't know if that's exactly what you had in mind, but that's a prominent example.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? So yes, the Greek translators are not sitting there, and nor are the New Testament writers sitting there kind of giving us their commentary, but you can kind of read between the lines in how they're translating the Hebrew and then what they're doing, whether they're relying on a kind of nuance that comes out in the Greek that's not there in the Hebrew. So it's, there's a lot there to study. All right, well, I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about some of the alternatives to Christianity or Judaism that would have been available to, Bible writers and Bible readers, and relate this to Alexander a little bit. So Alexander, remember, he's kind of a cultural missionary as well. And inadvertently, he creates a situation where it's, there's a lot of mobility, physical as well as social, and also a lot of angst and anxiety that we see produced, reflected in some of the writings at the time. Partly this is a result of his establishment of an empire and trying to merge everybody into one big, happy cultural family. Now, he was only partly successful, but he was not entirely unsuccessful. And what this did in a lot of Greek areas, part of the genius of ancient Greece was its vibrant sense of kind of local culture. You weren't just Greek, you were Athenian or Spartan or Corinthian. And his kind of globalizing impulse kind of undercut that. When everywhere is home, nowhere is especially home. when you are living in a place where you don't have self, kind of autonomy, your participation in the civic affairs of the city don't really have the same sort of traction. You don't really get to participate in the ruling of your city in the same way. We see some angst, and this is reflected in some of the philosophical writings. There's an inward turn in the Hellenistic philosophies that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Plato and Aristotle in the 5th century, 4th century, a lot of their philosophical writings are highly theoretical, very abstract, not very accessible to the common person. Not that the common person was sitting around studying philosophy anyway, but Plato, for example, talks about the nature of reality. Is the physical world the real world, or is there some realm of ideas that where true existence resides? Or in his famous work, The Republic, what's the ideal city? What's the ideal government? For many people, it's kind of a waste of time to talk about what the ideal government is. We don't have any way to bring that about. We live in an empire. We lived in an empire yesterday. We're going to be living in an empire tomorrow. Why bother kind of wasting our time with such abstract kind of matters? I want to be happy. I want contentment. And Plato and Aristotle aren't doing it for me. A lot of the philosophies that arise here seem to be addressing that kind of internal need, a desire for contentment, happiness, wisdom. And I'm going to talk about Epicureanism and Stoicism that arise a couple of decades after Aristotle in this setting. And a lot of the way they do philosophy, it's very therapeutic. I don't want to denigrate it by calling it like it sounds like self-help books, but there are elements of it that sound like self-help. It's trying to meet people where they are and deal with their everyday problems and not answer kind of theoretical, abstract kind of questions. The dominant metaphor and kind of range of imagery that you find in these philosophical writings may sound somewhat familiar. It's predominantly a medical metaphor. That is to say, happiness and virtue are health. You're healthy if you're happy in virtue. So if you are an immoral, lacking in virtuous person, if you're unhappy, that's like sickness or disease, right? Me as the teacher, the philosopher, I'm a doctor. Where we are together, well, if we were here together, where I am trying to teach you, go with that metaphor. It's like a classroom, right? The classroom is it's like a hospital. It's like or sometimes an operating room where you're going to be in pain when I operate on you, but it's for your own good and it will bring about healing, right? And the term, so you frequently find that kind of a metaphor. We're in a hospital. I'm the doctor. You're the patient. You're going to be healthy. And healing, interestingly, the Greek term for healing, soteria, is also the same Greek word that is often translated salvation in the New Testament. So I'm not saying they're all doing the same thing, but think about the kind of general family of terms and images that when we talk about Jesus being a savior, bringing salvation, he's aiming at. Well, that's the question: is he aiming at the same things, something related, or something very different? Though it sounds the same because it's the same word. We're going to find that there's some interesting similarities, at least on the surface, and maybe even deeper, between some of the philosophies that we see arise specifically in this era and religion. What is the difference between when I say religion and philosophy? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Do you think of yourself as a philosopher? It's kind of pretentious, right, to say, yeah, I'm a philosopher, even if you're a philosophy major, right? But we'll see if there's, what the dividing line between those two are. But the two schools of thought I want to talk about and then connect to the New Testament are Epicureanism and Stoicism. Epicurean. So, and these are both, at least words that, survive as adjectives in English. Epicurean, I don't know. That's maybe used not quite as often as Stoic, but what's the connotation of calling someone or something Epicurean? I don't know if that's a word that you use much.
I think it usually means they eat a lot.
That's funny. Hang on just a second.
Or that they eat carefully and elegantly.
That's right. I've got this book right here, which is called The Epicurean. It's a 1,000-page book. It's a huge cookbook that was given to me by my father. It was given to him by his father, who was he ran cafeterias actually for the TVA back in the Depression. But he didn't use this book much. But this cookbook is from the Delmonico's restaurant in New York City, which was like where high society ate. And so it's like all these recipes for turtle soup, all these like super fancy kinds of dishes that, I've never eaten before. But anyway, so it's kind of, it has a sense of refined taste, eating a lot. And partly that's partly an accurate representation of Epicureanism, the philosophy, partly not. But Epicureanism was founded by a guy named Epicurus around the year 300-ish, about 300 BC. Both of these, Epicureanism and Stoicism, were founded around 300 BC. And there are four main ideas, all that start with an A, at least the way I'm going to talk about them, that help us understand Epicureanism. We'll get to the cookbook in a minute. One is atomism. In some ways, Epicureanism is as much about science and physics as it is about philosophy and religion. But atomism is their belief that all reality, all the world, everything is made up of physical things. There is nothing that's not physical. So it's a materialist philosophy in that sense. And, this is, intriguingly a modern way of thinking about things. The word atom is something that's, like asexual, apolitical. The A means not. Atomos, where we get the word atom, is something that cannot be cut. And so if you break down things into smaller pieces, you finally get to tiny little pieces of things that can't be cut anymore. Those are atoms. That's the way they're talking about it. That's what you are. That's what I am. That's what everything is. Now, what are the implications of that? What happens when you die for an Epicurean? Anybody want to guess based on that view of what we are? You just kind of disintegrate.
To dust?
Yeah.
Just an Ash Wednesday. So
yeah. You're just dust. I mean, you break it down small enough. You are just dust. From dust you came. I mean, this is not their way of putting it, but they would say, yeah, we came from dust and we're going to return to dust. And they said, and that's the end of the story. I mean, for Christians, that's not the end of the story. But right, you are just going to disintegrate and kind of disseminate throughout the universe, and that's it. And so don't worry about the afterlife. Don't get worked up about that. Don't worry about death. Don't be afraid. There's no afterlife. And even if there is an afterlife in this philosophy, you're not going to be there. There's not going to be any you there. So their physics relates to their philosophy. And one aspect of their philosophy, and this is maybe kind of the core of it, is the term, I am sharing my screen, right? All right. So this term ataraxia. Ataraxia means freedom from disturbance. Freedom from disturbance. What do we want to do with our lives? How do we want to live it? We want to be free from disturbance. Now, Epicureanism often means like hedonism or pleasure seeking, and that's partly true. I mean, we want pleasure. Everybody wants pleasure, right? I want to eat really good food, not just macaroni and cheese out of a box, right? That's not quite as pleasant. So they have a reputation for being hedonists. which is partly fair, partly unfair. In reality, the Epicurean said, I just want to be content. You know, there are many things you can do which bring you great pleasure, but then what comes after that? You know, there's the high and then there's the low, right? A lot of the things that we do that bring us great pleasure also, if not right away, eventually bring us great pain and great disturbance. You know, and so while they advocate seeking pleasure and say that's really what, as just physical beings, that's really what it's all about. In practice, they're like, well, try to avoid extremes because if you go up, you're going to go down. So maybe it's wiser to just kind of, you know, even things out. Don't try for too much. Don't eat too much because then you're going to feel sick, right? Don't drink too much or else you're going to have a hangover. So, like I said, their reputation for being hedonists is partly deserved, but partly undeserved. They are often called atheists, which is partly fair, partly not fair. They said, hey, we believe in the gods, but, you know, but the gods are just like we are. They came from dust, and to dust they will return. They're much bigger than us, more powerful than us, but they don't really care about us. And so it's unfair in that they said we believe in gods. It's kind of fair in that what they said about the gods is not really like what most people believed about the gods. And so it was kind of, you know, we believe in gods with an asterisk. And then a fourth element of their philosophy is sometimes called anonymity, by which I mean their way of approaching life is don't seek for fame, don't seek fame, don't seek notoriety. Try to stay out of public affairs, especially things like politics. I mean, what have we seen increasingly over the last several years, right? I mean, back in November, some people were ecstatic about the outcome of the election, right? Some people were not ecstatic about the, you know, not ecstatic about the outcome of election. And even if it's not just elections, think about the passions that are involved in political affairs. Even if you're not like a politician, think about all the anger, the joy, the contempt, or, you know, at least we generally, unlike, say, during the Roman Empire, we generally don't have to fear for our lives after kind of getting on the wrong side of a political dispute. They saw that and they said, just opt out. You know, the kinds of violent passions that people experience as a result of being involved in public affairs, not worth it. And as I said, just live a retiring life. Stay low key, low profile. That'll lead to more happiness. One way to sum up their belief system is called the tetrapharmacon. So like tetra, like four, pharmacon, like pharmacy, the four-part remedy. And sometimes this is kind of like a neat little, you know, kind of, you know, Scout's Oath version of Epicurean philosophy. Don't fear the gods. Don't worry about death. The good is easy to get and evil's easy to endure. They're like, just remember that and you'll be in good shape. So, I mean, there are many other, you know, I could take us through some of the teachings of Epicurus and some of his later followers, like Lucretius, a Roman poet. But I don't think I'll do that right now. But let me stop and see, you know, see if any of that scratches you where you itch, or you want to, you know, if you have any particular questions about that. I don't know how familiar that is. Stoicism may be a little bit more familiar, but what do you think about Epicureanism? Any questions I need to come where I need to go back over anything there? There are more connections between Stoicism and early Christian writings. So a Stoic, again, this is an adjective that survives in English. Are you a Stoic, Minna? Would you call yourself a Stoic or not?
About some things, but generally, no. I wouldn't I'll speak out if I'm hurting.
So yeah, so Stoic often has the implication of kind of keeping quiet, enduring things, stifling your emotions. Stoicism was founded also around the year around 300 BC by a guy named Zeno. There are many people in the ancient world named Zeno. But perhaps the best thing that people know about Stoicism is expressed in the Greek term apatheia. Now that looks like apathy, and that is where our word apathy comes from. But this is another one of those words where it's like like a or so not something else. Pathos. Pathos, like, that is a word in English, means passion or emotion. The goal for the Stoic is to be free from emotion, free from passion. Passions are disturbing. And when we say passion, passion sounds like really, really strong, disturbing, maybe not always disturbing emotion, but strong emotion, right? So now in Greek, when it's translated passion, just means any emotion. Fear is an emotion. Joy is an emotion. Hatred is an emotion. I think maybe shame would be an emotion. So they are saying not just free yourself from really strong emotions, try to free yourself from all emotions. Let me kind of shift this over. So Epictetus is a first century AD philosopher and a very a popular Stoic teacher. This is kind of one of his students wrote these sayings down, almost like a Cliff Notes version of his teachings. One of his sayings is, some things are in our control, other things are not. Things are in our control or opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control. Body, property, reputation, command, and in one word, whatever are not our own actions. Knowing what's in your control and knowing what is not in your control. That's kind of the key to the good life for Stoics. Why worry about things that are not in your control? You're always going to be disappointed sooner or later, maybe later, but eventually there are going to be things that are not in your control. He said, here, number 3, with regard to whatever objects give you delight, are useful, or are deeply loved, remember to tell yourself what general nature they are. He said, at the end of it, it says, for example, to give one example, if you kiss your child or your wife, say to yourself that you only kiss things which are human, and thus you will not be disturbed if either of them dies. So how do you like that? So remind yourself as you kiss your wife, she's going to die. Let me see. At one point, he says, it's not bad things themselves that disturb us. It's our opinions that disturb us about those things. And often it's just the surprise. Your wife is going to die. Your husband's going to die. Your child's going to die. Hopefully your child does not die before you die. But they're human, according to Stoics, and therefore they're going to die. Remind yourself of that. The Latin term is premeditatio. So premeditation. Think about it ahead of time, so it won't take you by surprise, which is really what upsets us for the Stoics. And that's what kind of stokes those unhealthy emotions. The universe for the Stoics is a providentially ordered place. They talk about God. It's a little bit unclear what they think about God. There's kind of like a force that kind of governs the world. It's not really a terribly personal God, but there's something. And so the world is more or less the way it's meant to be. Saying number 8, don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. So if you want things to happen that aren't going to happen, you're going to be disappointed. Flip it around and learn to love things as they are. The world is the way it's supposed to be. And therefore, the phrase they use a lot is live according to nature. Nature is set up, you know, a target is meant to be hit. In the same way, the universe is the way it's meant to be. One way this is put is in number 17. Remember, you're an actor in a drama of such a kind as the author pleases to make it. If it's short, a short one. If it's long, a long one. If it's the author's pleasure that you should act a poor man, a cripple, a governor, or a private person, see that you act it naturally. For this is your business. To act well the character assigned to you. To choose it is another. So we're all in a play. We didn't write the play. Play your part. It's just important to be a slave in that play as it is to be a king. Shakespeare says something like that. Elvis in the soliloquy in Are You Lonesome Tonight? Says something like that. I don't think Elvis was necessarily reading Epictetus here, but the same idea here is we all play a part. In practical terms, often that meant something very different from Epicureanism. If you were born into a family or in a situation where you are a senator in the Roman Republic, that's your duty. Play that role. If you're a slave, be the best slave you can be. And so in terms of kind of mobility, I guess you'd say, it's a very conservative philosophy. It doesn't seek to change the world, kind of accept it as it is, and realize what you can change and what you cannot change. Otherwise, you're going to be unhappy, he says. So we could go into more detail with Stoicism, but let me stop and see how that grabs you. In recent years, one of the most, for many people, they hadn't heard of Stoicism or Epictetus until, and maybe this, you may not know this either, but does anybody know who Admiral James Stockdale is? Does that name mean anybody? He ran, a lot of people, all they know is he was Ross Perot's vice presidential running mate in, I don't know if it was in 92 or 96 or both. And he was really old by then, and I think he, had a bad debate or something like that. But before that, he had been, an admiral, and he had been a prisoner of war for several years. I don't know if he was personally, like friends with John McCain or not, but he was in the Hanoi Hilton for a long time. And afterwards, he wrote a lot. And he said specifically what helped him get through getting tortured over and over as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, North Vietnam, was he had read Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher. And he said he had kind of internalized that, and that he said that's what helped me get through it. Now, most of us are not going to be in that situation where we have to rely on Stoic philosophy to get us through torture. But sometimes these ancient writers have said, what would be worse, to be tortured, or a torturer? And they said it'd be worse to be a torturer. You can endure torture, and you can keep it from affecting your soul, who you really are. But if you become an active torturer, that's bad. That corrupts you from the inside. Nobody would want to torture somebody, and nobody obviously would want to be tortured either. Given the choice, though, I think a lot of us find it really hard to opt for being tortured. Well, so these are two very popular philosophies in the world where we see New Testament. They address some of the social anxieties that are the unintended consequence of Alexander's transforming of the world. they are both in a sense kind of religious in that, like Judaism and Christianity, they demanded something like conversion. Stoics would not say, hey, it's cool if you want to practice some Stoicism and also practice Epicureanism. They would say, you got to decide. These are incompatible. You can't just dabble or be a dilettante. You've got to make a decision and live a certain kind of life. Same way that Jews and Christians did. Most other religions in the ancient world were like, okay, if you want to just kind of like mix and match, more is better. But the Stoics and the Epicureans demanded something like, kind of soul allegiance. So they kind of blur some of those lines between religion and philosophy. Interestingly, just a few connections to the New Testament. In Acts chapter 17, Paul is traveling the Mediterranean. He goes to Athens and preaches this famous sermon at the Areopagus. It's kind of short, but it specifically mentions Epicurean and Stoic philosophers there. So a lot of people read that and say, okay, what part of the speech may have been trying to address them or persuade them? In the book of Philippians, Paul's letter to the Philippians, in chapter 1, he's in prison. Sounds like he's contemplating his imminent demise. Some people look at it, I don't, but that he's actually thinking, he says, for me to die, I can't make up my mind to die and be with God, or to remain and be here with you. What would be better? I think I'd rather die. A lot of people say he's thinking about committing suicide, which would be a very Stoic way of thinking about things. Take things in your control. If sometimes that may mean ending your own life. Committing suicide was not forbidden by Stoics. I don't know that Paul was necessarily talking about committing suicide, but a lot of people try to understand, is this kind of a response to or a transformation of Stoic ideas? Now in chapter 4 of Philippians, he also says, hey, I've learned how to be rich. I've learned how to be poor. Whatever situation I find myself in, I try to be content. It's kind of a Stoic notion. It's maybe not, uniquely Stoic. And then 1 Corinthians 7 is the last thing I'll mention here. We're about out of time. There, Paul is saying, among others, he's talking about marriage and things like that. If you're married, should you try, should you stay married? If you're single, should you try to get married or stay single? If you're a slave, should you try to gain your freedom, or should you remain a slave? His general rule there is, whatever situation you find yourself in, stay in that situation. Don't try to upturn things. You have a role to play. You have a purpose to fill. And so fill it where you are. Whether that's the influence of Stoicism or not, I don't know, but it's an interesting comparison to make. So we could look at a few others as well, but I just want to throw those out. Again, these are texts and philosophies that, again, we've kind of veered a little bit far from Alexander himself, but without him, you probably wouldn't have religion and philosophy looking the way it does. So anyway, I wanted to put those things out there to give you some things to think about. There may be opportunity to follow up on it. I've got 10:39, so I'll stop talking there.
Patrick, I have a question. Doesn't Paul say that in Corinthians about not changing your position because the time is short?
Right. Yeah. So it says the time is short, or in light of the impending crisis. Some people look at that and say, hey, the end of the world's right around the corner. Why bother? Whether that's a good translation of that, I'm not sure. But yeah, so the time is short, or the time, the something like that. Right. Mm-hmm.
Strikes me that if either Martin Luther King or John Lewis or any of that group had been Stoic or Epicurean, our country would look very different today.
Yeah, either because of I'm going to kind of withdraw from public life, or I'm going to not see kind of the injustice as unjust as it is, or worth or able to be changed. Yeah, I think if you were a thoroughgoing Stoic or Epicurean, it certain things wouldn't happen probably, right?
Yeah, I suppose Stoicism probably appeals to you more if you're already in a situation where you're likely to be satisfied with the principle that the universe has put you.
Or you feel like you can't opt out, I guess, you
Yeah.
know. So you can see that, you know, for a slave who really can't change, you know, that might be kind of a solace, I suppose. Or like you said, you know, if you're the emperor like Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century AD, who's also a philosopher, yeah, maybe it's easier to say, hey, I'm the emperor and that's the way it was meant to be.
I guess I have to live in accordance with nature.
That's right. Nature wanted me here as the most powerful man in the world. Everybody in between, it might be a little trickier. Yeah. So these are some things that would have been, you know, not everybody's reading Stoicism or Epicureanism, but these are some of the alternatives available to the man in the street, so to speak, you know, in the biblical period, whether they actively, you know, kind of resisted them or considered them, and I don't, you know, it's hard to know. You don't always even know what's influencing you. All right. Well, I've enjoyed this, and you know, I wish I could have been there. I was thinking about it though. You know, when I was first asked to do this a few months ago, there was, I guess, a plan. Judy had said we may do it kind of hybrid. We're hoping to be in person. And I was thinking it'd be great to be in person, but then I'd have to wear a mask and I have to yell, and you know, so I don't know which one's better.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. We really appreciate your joining us.
Thanks,
Good to see you
Patrick.
guys again. Stay warm.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you guys next week is Steve McKenzie. So.
Bye-bye.